In this lecture, we're talking about prefabs. I've got a couple of prefabs that I've created and a whole bunch of instances in my scene. We'll talk about that and we'll create just a fun little scene and do some experimenting. So let's get in and start talking about prefabs. Let's start by making a ground for our car to sit on. To do that, over in my hierarchy, right-click and we will scroll down until we find 3D Object and Plane. Automatically drops a ground plane or a plane in general. It's not necessarily a ground plane, but usually that's what it's used for. You can see it's floating a little bit, so I'm going to bring my ground plane up until the tires are touching the tires on the car. Excellent, great. Now, if you wanted to make your ground plane bigger, click on the ground plane. Well, actually, here's a little micro challenge for you. How would you go about making the ground plane bigger? Okay, well, I'm going to hit R on the keyboard and I will scale like so. There we go. We've got a bigger area we're working with now. Now, we've got one car in our scene, but I want to have a whole bunch of cars in our scene. There's a couple of ways we can go about doing it. The simplest way is I could do Control D. So while I'm clicked on the car, Control D, that will duplicate the entirety of the car and I can move that into a different position. So that's known as duplicating. That creates a whole new game object that's exactly the same as the previous car. There's a flaw in this process that we're not really going to see in this lecture, but in the future, trust me, it will be a flaw, is that if we wanted to change something about all of the cars in our scene, we'd have to go into each car, okay, change that one, maybe the wheels are a little bit too big, go in that one, change that one, then go into this car and change the wheels on that car, and so on. And that's a real pain. In the future, what we want to be able to do is say, well, let's have one template car. If we make any changes on that, for example, let's make the roof a little bit skinnier, we want all of the other cars to change and to update. And the way we do that is with prefabs. So I'm just going to delete my second car I dropped down, click on car, and then hold down left mouse button and drag down into my assets area down here and let go. That has created a prefab. Now, if I click on car down the bottom, I can see assets/car.prefab. Interestingly, I'll just show you this because I find it quite interesting. Right click, show in Explorer. Now we can see within our assets folder, we have a car.prefab. This has now been saved to our hard drive. And you can see in our hierarchy, we now have car has turned blue. And there's a lot of depth we'll go into with prefabs throughout the course. There's a lot we can do, but for now, we're just going to keep it very simple and use it at a basic level. But I promise you we'll get into a lot more detail as we go through the course in how to use prefabs to their maximum power. For the moment, we're just going to use it to bring another instance of the car into the scene. So let's do that. Click and hold on car down the bottom, drag, boom, there we go. We've got a second car in our scene and a third car and a fourth car and so on. We can bring in as many of these as our heart desires into our scene. Maybe we can say there's 2 lanes of traffic. So I'm going to hit W, move, click, move, and maybe this is one side of the road and then over here is the other side of the road. Of course, I made my car look direction agnostic, so you can't really see whether it's going forwards or backwards. Let's see if we can change that. And the way I'm going to do that is by finding my car prefab down the bottom yonder in our assets folder, double click, and that will take me into just my prefab. And I'm going to open up, expand, so over in the top left in the hierarchy, you can see we've got car, and you can see scenes car. That means we're working in this car prefab. And I'm going to find the car top, so click on the car top and maybe move it backwards that way a little bit. Which way does it look like it's going forwards? Yeah, it feels good to say it's going in the positive X direction. So you see this is our positive X to the right. So it doesn't really matter. You could do it either way. It could be that could be the front or that could be the front. Or maybe you've kind of made a truck and this is the tray on the back of the truck. Anyway, I'm gonna pretend that my car has a hood at the front here or a bonnet at the front and it's driving that way. And if you look up in the top right of our scene window, you'll see that there's an auto save box that's ticked on by default. That means that as soon as we close out of our prefab, it will be saved automatically to our hard drive. If I, top left corner, if I click on the little arrow up here, you can see up in the very top left, click on the arrow, that will take me back to the scene, and all of my car instances have been updated. Now they've all got this, the top of the car at the back. And these guys are facing the wrong direction, so I'm going to hit E, rotate them around, bing, 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 so they're driving in the other direction. Okay, so there's a real massive power in prefabs that you can make a modification to your template or your prefab, and then all of the instances in your scene will be updated accordingly. Very, very powerful. And it's just the tip of the iceberg, my friend, in terms of the things we can do with prefabs. There's a lot more to come. The other thing I'll point out in terms of making changes is you don't have to change all of your instances, all of these cars in your scene, to look exactly the same. Well, if I was to click on this particular one here, I can do this for any of them. So we'll take this car here and find the car top, hit W to move it. I could move this. Actually, I'll do, let's see, I'll scale this. Scale a bit longer and a little bit higher. There we go. Move it up a little bit. You can see that I'm making these changes. Maybe now it's a little bit of a truck. Actually, I'll make it a little bit wider as well. There we go. It's a bit of a delivery van. You can make these changes to one instance and it won't affect the prefab. So if I go and drag my prefab in, it'll still look like the prefab was looking before. Delete that guy because he's not needed there. So that's the fundamentals of it. What I want to do is give you a challenge here. And that is to make a scene. Create at least 2 prefabs. I've created one already, which is our car that I've dragged down into my assets folder to become a prefab. I want you to make a second one, and each prefab should be a grouping of multiple objects into one. So for example, I've got 5 or 6 car parts, and I group that in to make a car, and then it's the car that I create as a prefab. And then create a quick little scene using your prefabs. Maybe you can make some houses, maybe you can make some light posts, some lamps, you could create some different sort of vehicles, a couple of motorbikes, whatever you like. Do something fun, do something crazy. There's no way you're going to break it at the moment. So experiment, just allow yourself to have a little bit of fun in this stage. This is what this first introduction section of this course is all about. Just have fun and see what works and play around with Unity. And after you create something, please share a screenshot in the discussions and or in the Q&A. So you should see a link somewhere near this video that says a link to the discussions section, and you can plop it in there. Just a note on how you can do a screenshot. If you're on Windows and you hit the Windows key and then type in SNIP, etc., you can get the snipping tool. The snipping tool is a really effective way just to grab a screenshot. So I'm going to click on New, and I will then go drag, and then that's me creating a scene. That's created a JPEG, I believe. I can do a file, save as, and then save it to a spot, and then upload that against the discussion. So that's how you share things. Sorry, I'm not exactly sure the best way to do that on Mac, but I know that Mac has a similar snipping tool or clipping tool, so a little Google search if you're on Mac will show you how to capture from Mac. So back to the challenge. This is it. Go ahead and make a scene. After you've done that, I'll come back and just add a couple of extra things and show you my process of creating a second prefab. So pause the video and take on that challenge now. Okay, I'm going to start myself off with making a street light. So how will we do that? I'll right click and 3D object. I'll start with a cylinder. And I'm going to make sure this cylinder is right in the center of the world. So right click on transform reset. There it is, right in the very middle, just so I know it's centered at 0, 0, 0. Excellent. I'm going to scale this down so it's skinnier. So R to scale skinny. And then I'll hit T on my rect transform tool and drag it up. There we go. How tall are street lights? Tall enough that a truck can fit under it, I guess. There we go. I hit W, just move it down so it's touching the ground. When I've clicked on cylinder, I will duplicate, and then E for rotate, Control to make it snap, W to move it up, move it over, try to get it nice and organized, up a little bit. Okay, now I want to scale it, but I don't want to scale it so that it scales in from the end. So if I hit R, you can see if I scale it this way, it's coming in from the both ends. I have to reposition it again. I'm going to undo that. How can I do this so I can just drag one side in? Well, if I hit T, that's my rect transform, and I can just bring one side of it in. Now, last thing I'll do is a little lamp thing on top. So once again, right-click, cylinder, and the cylinder's up in the air. That's roughly the right sort of size of it. I'll use my rect transform tool and bring it down that way. W, move it over. A little bit large, R to scale, reduce it down, W. Now, I want to group all this together, so a little micro challenge for you here if you haven't done this already. How do you go about creating an object so that we can group these game objects together? Well, I'm going to right-click, create empty, and I can rename over on the hierarchy, or I can rename in the inspector. I'll rename this to be street light. Hit enter, and I will reset the transform, so right-click, reset, so it's right in the center of our world. I'm now going to highlight cylinder, down to cylinder 2, drag onto street light, not underneath, not above, that won't work, it's right on top of street light. And there we go. So now they are childed to streetlight. We could go in and rename each of these. So I could rename this upright. Well, let me just do this. Upright. I could rename this one to be click crossbar. And rename the last one to be lamp. We'll see. Okay, now prefabbing. Click, drag down into the assets area. We now have ourselves a prefab. Click on the original street light and move it over to the side. I'm now going to drag in a new street light. You can see how it snaps nicely on top of our ground plane. That was one of the other reasons why I wanted to get a ground plane in there, because you can see as you drag things around, it'll snap on top. So I probably shouldn't have a street light on top of my car, although it's kind of fun to do that. Move it over the other side of the street. Now, side note, I haven't mentioned this already, but if I was to delete all three of these street lights, I can still use my prefab. So let me just show you that very quickly, and then I'll undo that. No need to follow this. So if I delete all of those, I can still drag in a new street light. Once it's prefabbed, we don't lose it if we've deleted it from the scene. So I'm going to undo again, so I get my street lights back. Excellent. I can also do a Control D and then move these guys down to the side. And you can see the process of duplicating an instance of a prefab will create another instance of a prefab. Now, my hierarchy is becoming a big old mess. So let me tidy this up. I'm going to right-click, create empty. We'll rename this to be cars, plural. And then right-click, transform, reset, so it's in the middle. I'm going to grab each of my cars, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then control-click if I don't want to get the directional light. Drag into cars. There we go. Now I can close that up. All the cars now will be in that cars folder. So we can use it like a folder system, like a hierarchy system, this mechanism of creating empty game objects. I'm going to do this again. Right-click, create empty. I'll change this to be street lights. Right-click on transform, reset. We don't have to do this, but like I say, it's good practice to get into for the future. I'm going to click on street light, shift, control, drag onto street lights. Excellent. Roll that up. Now it's much tidier, isn't it? Whew. Last thing I'm going to do is on street lights. So I'm going to highlight all of the street lights within, Control D, duplicate them, move them across the other side of the road. I'm going to rotate all of these 180 degrees, so hit E, and then Control as I rotate, the whole grouping will rotate around the other way. Excellent. W to move them in a little bit. Okay, I think these street lamps are a little bit too abundant, so I'm going to click on every second one of them and delete. Second one, delete, and second one, delete. Okay, so just a little fun street scene there. I hope you come up with something yourself. Please do take a screenshot and share it with us, and I'll see you in the next lecture.